Well, hello and welcome to another edition of Health Solutions with Shawn and Janet Needham, where Team Needham discusses everything healthcare. I am your host, Shawn Needham, and we are streaming live from the Moses Lake Professional Pharmacy Studio today. Our midweek podcast, as usual, today at 8 to 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. You can always catch us on my personal Facebook page and the Moses Lake Professional Pharmacy Facebook page and the Moses Lake Professional Pharmacy YouTube site. And all these episodes are archived on the YouTube site. So go subscribe to our YouTube site, check it out, comment, let us know what else you'd like to see. We'd really appreciate that as our YouTube site is ever growing. So today I am welcoming back Dr. Kourtney Sanfelice. She's a wonderful pharmacist that we've had on before, and she is going to be a frequent guest in the future because it's so nice to have a pharmacist that kind of speaks the same language as me. I was just talking to Kourtney before the show started, and there's a lot of us out there. I think Janet and I were kind of called crazy a few years ago. I mean, Janet and I have been doing this for 20 some years now, and we were called witch doctors. We were called crazy. We were said that we weren't going to be in business any longer. And, we had a lot of people that didn't believe in us. And now it's interesting that, 20 some years later, these pharmacists are coming out of the woodworks that believe like we do. I had an interview with a pharmacist yesterday from the American Frontline Doctors, who are doctors that are standing up during all the mandates over the last 2 years. And they are actually recruiting pharmacists to come alongside them. There was a lot of nurses and doctors. They were missing some pharmacists. They wanted some pharmacists with expertise in the area and that believed in medical freedom. And so they reached out to me because that's what I believe in is medical freedom. It should be a patient's choice. And one of my goals is to educate and empower individuals to take charge of their own health. That's one of the reasons I started a podcast. So Dr. Kourtney Sanfelice, welcome back to our show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Shawn. I love it. I love it here. I love our discussions. It's awesome. And it is so nice to talk to somebody where we're on the same wavelength, where it's not just, here's some pills, bye. I just love all of the topics that you discuss all the time. And I'm so honored to be on again today. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. Today, we're going to talk about hemp, specifically kind of CBD. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
So I am not very educated on this subject. I know a little bit about it, but if you could, over the next half hour, educate us, I'm sure you'll do a great job doing that. So Kourtney, go.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So how I established CBD was, it had to be a little over 5 years ago before really anybody knew, before it was a common household name, before people really understood what it was. The independent pharmacy that I work for, my boss had brought back samples from a convention, and they were kind of sitting on the shelf, and I saw them and I was like, what are these? And he was like, oh, that's CBD, cannabis, da, da, da. And I was like, well, is this legal? Like, what's going on? He's like, no, it's used to treat things like pain and anxiety, which he knew I suffered from and was taking a medication for. And, he said it's up and coming. A lot of people are using it successfully. And at that point, there was maybe, there was some brands out, but it wasn't, like I said, it wasn't a common thing. People didn't know what it was. So I decided to dabble in the samples. And within 1 week, I tapered myself off of Celexa, off an antidepressant that I was on for 16 years, with the exception of when I was pregnant with my son. I was off of it, but that was the only thing that would control that antsy kind of panicky feeling. My hands and feet would go numb. I would get palpitations, shortness of breath. It happened to me 8 to 10 times a day, to the point where I went to my doctor and was like, what the heck is this? Of course, they wrote a script back then I'm brand Zoloft old. So it was way back when Zoloft was brand. And he put me on that, and he gave me a script for Klonopin. Okay. Like, see you next Tuesday. Like, what? These panic attacks, these things would last for maybe 30, 60 seconds. Like, it wasn't something that was, like interfering. It was to the point where it was annoying and interfering with my day, but not something I needed something like that. So Zoloft then, and then after my son, I went on Celexa back when it happened again, as soon as I had him. So I was on 2 different medications, but for 16 years. And in 1 week, I was able to taper off of that medication with CBD. And I just thought that was ridiculous. So I was like, this is crazy. Like a plant, come on. So I just dove in, and I dove in to research and learn more about it. And back then there were not a lot of studies. It was very hard to find information. So a lot of it came from different manufacturers. So I was dabbling in different brands and trying to find out what worked the best. And I was kind of experimenting with my close patients in the pharmacy, family and friends. Hey, are you willing to give this a try? Oh, you're suffering from pain, migraines. There's just so many different things, which I'll get into. But it was something for me that when I saw how it helped me, I thought there has to be a better way for other people to use this to help them to not have to take so many pharmaceuticals. And I started a program. So it started very small. And, it was funny when it started, we had our little display of like hot products at the register in the pharmacy, and people would kind of like look over their shoulders when they were looking at them. Like, is this legal? Like, what's going on here? Right. It was pretty comical. And a funny side story was I had like just like marketing like our fun products at the register. And there was this one thing, it was called Clear My Head, and it was for allergies. And you open the jar and it smelled like eucalyptus and stuff. It had nothing to do with CBD at all, but it was placed very wrong by me. People would like open the jar and they were like smelling it, looking over their shoulder. I think they thought it was like the products. And I was like, we would be watching behind the counter, like maybe we should move that. But it was hilarious. But anyway, so I started to introduce it to our customers. We started with, very small and people that were open-minded and willing to try it. And I started working one-on-one and was seeing, anything from people with migraines, either stopping them or when they stopping them in their tracks. But if they were taking it regularly, like stopping their migraine condition altogether, where they weren't giving themselves injections to stop or taking a daily medication for their migraines, or big thing, pain from arthritis to muscle pain to neuropathy, people taking this and just couldn't believe how well it worked. Or people, before COVID, we would do samples and people would, use a cream or something. And if they didn't buy it then, they'd walk out to their car and come back in and say, oh my gosh, like that, they would buy it and be like, this is ridiculous. It worked so quickly on my pain. And then there's the anxiety, the depression, people that use it for that. I've seen a dog had a tumor in her chest, and the dog was on it for a month, and they came back in and said, the vet was like, what are you doing? Like, the dog's tumor is shrunk in like size and in girth. Like, it was softer and smaller in 1 month of using CBD. So it just has been like, so I started actually a class called Let's Talk Hemp, and it was like the third Tuesday of the month. It was, everybody came in and the class grew wild. It was, people wanted to learn about it because back then there wasn't a lot of information, and I kind of was self-taught in the area, and I learned as I went. When I looked at what I taught my class looked like from when it started until what it looks like now, with all of the testimonies, hundreds of testimonies that I have written from people. I'm actually collecting in a book to share with people to see just how many things it can be used for. So it's a powerful plant. It works. The testimonies are amazing, but a lot of people are like, kind of in disbelief. Well, how does it work on so many different things? You're talking about pain, you're talking about anxiety, you're talking about seizures. Like, a lot of moms have created companies based on their children with epilepsy. And the only thing, like, even though they're on pharmaceuticals, in addition, like, I've watched children decrease their pharmaceuticals that are using just CBD, and they're barely on any pharmaceuticals. It's more the CBD that controls their seizures when they have epilepsy. And there's I know that there's a handful of companies out there that their moms actually created. So it's just amazing. But it's like, how does this work? How does this work on the body? Why does it work for so many different things? So
that was going to be my question, Kourtney, is that, as a pharmacist, I'm always skeptical of a drug that works for everything, not everything, but a lot of things with very minimal side effects. So that's what I was going to ask you. So let's see, you're going into that, but how does it work?
So a lot of people don't know. Have you ever heard of the endocannabinoid system?
I've heard of it, correct.
So a lot of people haven't. So apparently, I would say statistics right now are 13% of medical schools, pharmacy schools, nursing schools teach about the endocannabinoid system. Our endocannabinoid system is entwined with all of our other systems. Like, it's really important. It's just as important as as our circulatory system, our digestive system, our nervous system. And basically what it is it's our body's homeostasis. So this system in our body, which a lot of healthcare professionals, again, are neglected to be taught about, is our body's homeostasis, which is when everything is in balance. So we have these receptors in our body, CB1 and CB2 receptors. So CB1 receptors are found primarily in the brain, and CB2 receptors are found primarily throughout our immune system. And when you look at a cannabis plant as a whole, the two main cannabinoids in a cannabis plant are CBD and THC. THC is the component that causes cognitive impairment, where you get the high from. So the products that I'm talking about today, the professional grade full spectrum CBD, has 0.3% or less THC in it. So there's a small amount that cannot impair you in any way, shape, or form, but it works with the other cannabinoids, and there's like 140 of them in the cannabis plant, CBD being one of them. I'll talk about CBN in a little bit, a new product that's out for sleep now it's a cannabinoid that's focused more on sleep. But these cannabinoids all work together. All the terpenes, flavonoids in a cannabis plant all work together to give you what they call the entourage effect. And that's where it comes into play. That's the kind of, and I'll explain the difference between different products as well, like an isolate, a full spectrum, a broad spectrum, because there's a difference. And I think a lot of people don't understand that, and it's important. So these receptors in our body, if you have a small amount of THC, it's not binding, causing the cognitive impairment. The other cannabinoids are binding to the CB2 receptors in your body, thus filling these receptors and causing that homeostasis in your body. So things like anxiety, appetite and hunger control, it actually helps with digestion. I've seen people that have stomach issues, if they have like Crohn's or any kind of thing where they're having like any kind of inflammation base, because it does work as an anti-inflammatory. I'll explain that too. But anxiety, mood, temperature regulation. Some people even can use it for withdrawal symptoms. It helps with fertility. It helps balance out, pretty much putting your body in that homeostasis so that it can function properly. So how else does it work? It works as an anti-inflammatory at the cellular level, and it works as an antioxidant at the cellular level. So pretty much any disease state that we can think of comes from inflammation, right? At some place in the body, right? So again, that's why it works on so many things. A lot of autoimmune conditions that people have, because it really decreases that inflammation throughout the body. And it works as an antioxidant. A lot of people say, well, what's an antioxidant? I always like to explain it to people like it's like eating an apple. You take a bite, turns brown pretty quickly. We're constantly producing new cells in our body, and those cells can either do good things or bad things the way that we treat our body, eating, sleeping, exercising, all of the things that we do to stay healthy. Those cells can either turn into healthy cells or disease cells. So it's a really rich antioxidant to take in as a supplement, even if you're not using it for something that's an actual medical condition. And what a lot of people don't know, again, our body actually produces endogenous cannabinoids. So we have anandamide and we have 2-AG, which are things that our body will help fill these receptors naturally, but they're not anything that can cause like a therapeutic effect. So it's kind of almost like the idea of like a hug and releasing oxytocin, or that like runner's high when you get your endorphins from running. It's kind of like the same thing. Like it'll last you for a little bit, but it's not going to treat something therapeutic to that level, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally.
So it works in these ways. So as the anti-inflammatory antioxidant, like just to even like I'll see sometimes with like Parkinson's patients or people that have dementia, where sometimes their family members will notice small changes or big changes, but even just to take it to slow down the progression of a disease to help promote that healthy cell growth, all of those different cannabinoids have specific functions. So we're learning that now that it's, you hear CBD is the main thing that you hear, but all of those cannabinoids have specific roles. So we're kind of just scratching the surface with CBD products. So CBN is now kind of like on the rise, where CBN is another cannabinoid, just like CBD, just like THC, but it's one that helps with sleep. So having higher concentrations of CBN in these products actually working, and not as an isolate, which I'll explain in a second, but working together in synergy with the other cannabinoids helps promote sleep, which is pretty awesome. So the difference between these products, so you hear cannabinoids, you hear isolates. So when you look at a product and it's an isolate, they basically just isolate CBD from the cannabis plant itself, and you're just looking at CBD. Does it work? Yeah, I've seen some success, but it's not as good as a full spectrum. Then there's a broad spectrum, and a broad spectrum is where they extract all of the THC. So if you were to take it to a lab and check it, there would be no traces of THC whatsoever in there, but it's all of the other cannabinoids, terpenes, flavonoids, everything else in the plant. And then a full spectrum is when they just extract the THC to the 0.3% or less to sell at the legal limit where there's no impairment, and all of the cannabinoids, terpenes, flavonoids. That's when you get that entourage effect. That's when you get the best results with a full spectrum professional grade CBD. So
let me back up on that. Okay. So let's define, what does CBD actually stand for?
Cannabidiol.
Okay. What does CBN actually stand for?
I don't know what the N stands for. So there is like CBNA. There's like 140 of them. So they're very long chemical names. Let's put it that way.
And let me just back up to my pharmacy background. So before CBD, there was what's the prescription product? Marinol?
Yes.
Right? And what's the generic name of Marinol? I can't remember what it is, but it's when we talk about isolates. So here's one of the issues that we have when we try to isolate active ingredients from plants, is that when we try to pick one ingredient from a plant, I've talked about it on the podcast before, it's actually, we're trying to figure out what's an active ingredient in that plant. And in reality, there's many things that work synergistically in that plant that need to all be in there. So that's kind of what you're talking about when you have broad spectrum, is that it's not just one ingredient that is active in CBD. It's multiple ingredients that plant has in there. So one of the problems with pharmaceutical companies trying to find the active ingredient in a plant, a few weeks ago on the podcast, I used aspirin as an example. Aspirin has been used for years to treat fevers and headaches. White willow bark was used for years to treat fever and headaches back centuries ago. And so then Bayer Pharmaceuticals figured that out, and they tried to isolate the active ingredient. And the active ingredient was acetylsalicylic acid, aspirin, but that caused a lot of side effects. So CBD is not really a single ingredient. There's multiple ingredients in CBD, but they do vary from company to company, correct?
They do, absolutely. And the quality too. So I stress that to people so much. It's not even just with CBD, with supplements, with anything. You want to get something that's a good, reputable company that really does like third-party testing, that looks and dives in and says what's actually going on here. So what you want to find in a CBD product, you want to look for a certificate of analysis. And usually what you'll see on those products is a QR code on the package, and you can scan it with your phone. And what it does is it gives you the report, and you can tell what kind of CBD it is, whether it's an isolate, broad, or full spectrum, because it lists all of the cannabinoids and their percentages in there. It also lists, it almost looks kind of like a water report. Like you can see if there's any, like what pesticides, what the soil looked like that it was grown in, any kind of microbes that, to the minimal limit, to make sure that, yes, there's a little bit. The good news is that a cannabis plant is very hardy. So it requires not a lot of fertilizers and pesticides, which is great. So they look at that on this certificate of analysis as well, so people can see actually what is going into their body. And if your product does not have a certificate of analysis, you definitely don't want to buy it. But when you look on it too, you can look at it. If it says the THC content is 0, but you see multiple cannabinoids, you can say, oh, okay, this one's a full spectrum, this one's a broad spectrum and not a full spectrum. And then when the THC is present, you can see that it's a full spectrum, or if it's just CBD itself, it's an isolate. For me personally, I say to go with a full spectrum. So a lot of people ask about drug testing when it comes to, like, well, I get random drug tested at work. What do I do? I tell those people that they should either avoid it or they should check with their employer. This is what I'm using. Hey, I can show you that there's no impairment with this product. I can prove, I can show you. But when it comes down to it, if you take a broad spectrum product to a lab, you will not find any traces of THC. If you take the full spectrum, you will see the smaller levels. You'll see them at a legal limit where they can't be cognitively impairing you in any way, shape, or form. But if you're getting like a 7-panel drug test for employment or something like that, it can come up. But the problem is I tell people to avoid the broad spectrum as well, because CBD itself can come up as a false positive on a test. So I don't even keep those in the pharmacy, because when people go to, like, if they're not getting the proper counseling and, there's just a cashier selling them and being like, oh, there's no THC, so I must be safe with this product. Generally speaking, if you want to take it to a lab, that's fine. But most people won't take it to that level. They'll see the trace. They can see, the traces of it just from it being like, they mimic each other basically. So on a basic panel, both can come up. So I always caution and, err on the side of caution and say, if it's something that you can't because of that, if it's more of like a corporate place and not somebody where, oh, hey, I'd rather you use this plant than like Percocet for your pain, but it's crazy to me too. My husband has his CDL and he won't use it. He hasn't been drug tested ever in however many years he's been driving, and he won't touch it because he's like, if it would come up. But if he had a prescription, which he doesn't, but if he did, he could absolutely have a impairing prescription, and that's okay, which is mind-blowing.
Right. Well, so I didn't know this. This is great. One of the great things about my podcast is that I have experts like yourself on, and they educate me. And it does make sense that in the inexpensive drug test urinalysis, they're pretty non-specific. So it makes sense that CBD would make you test positive for marijuana. But if they are more specific about the testing, if you do test positive, and they go and they do, I don't know if they do a mass spec or what they do, and they test individual ingredients, it would be negative for enough THC to impair you, but it would still test positive on the test. So that's good, really good to know. But how do we get around there's not really a way to get around that if you're just not honest with your employer or, the person doing the testing. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And it's really sad to see, because a lot of people that are in pain management that get, 3 opioids a month, and they want to find an alternative and try to taper off of what they're on and use something more natural. A lot of them can't, because they get a urine screen before they get their prescription every month for their opioids. And they can't do it because it'll come up, their urinalysis will come up positive, and then they won't get their prescriptions that they can't stop cold turkey, depending on what level of pain they're on. If they're a cancer patient, where CBD can really benefit them, not even just for pain, but just like we were talking about for, healthy cell growth. There's specific cannabinoids that, and offhand, I couldn't tell you what they are, but that are specific for like bone regeneration and things like that. So if it's like a bone cancer patient, like something that they could use as an adjunct therapy, where they still might be in a severe amount of pain where they may need pharmaceuticals, being able to use them together would be ideal, but a lot of people can't. And that really stinks because of that. There's really no way of getting around it unless somebody's open-minded and says, okay, this is what I'm using. I can show you what's in the product I'm using. I can print you this certificate of analysis. I can give you proof, but a lot of people, depending on the situation, won't. I know different corporate places, I won't mention the name of the corporation, but I don't know how many years back my dad went for his little like retirement job, and I had him on the capsules for his his back pain, and I was like, okay, well, he went to get the job and he like failed the drug test. I was like, I'm sorry, Dad.
So
I didn't mean it.
Yeah, let's talk about the legality. This is a pharmacist coming out to me. Let's talk about the legality of this. So marijuana is a class 1 substance still, correct?
It is.
Which that means marijuana is still illegal federally, right? And as pharmacists, we know that. And as pharmacists, we have to know that. even though there's some states, Washington being one of them, that says it is legal medically and recreationally. Federally, it is still illegal, and the DEA can still crack down on marijuana, selling. So tell us a little bit about that and CBD, because I will tell you, I went to a conference back in 2018, pretty early on in the CBD market. And I was told, they showed us a letter. I can't remember from who, that somebody federally, Department of Health or something. Actually, I think it's Attorney General or something. I don't remember. But CBD at the time was illegal. Now, you could buy it at, XYZ Safeway or convenience store. But my whole argument was, as a pharmacist, if you were selling CBD and it's a class 1 substance, you could lose your DEA license, and then you can't sell controlled substances. So can you elaborate on that, Kourtney?
Yes. And at the very beginning of this, so 2018 Farm Bill is what made it legal to sell as an over-the-counter supplement, recognizing that 0.3% or less was legal in all 50 states. And that was, I don't know what time in 2018, but it was definitely the Farm Bill of 2018. So probably, if we go back, I started to do this maybe a year before that. And when I did, I questioned that to my boss. I said, is this really okay for us to be selling in here? Because it doesn't make sense. Like this is a Schedule 1, how are we able to do this? And he's like, oh, the DEA he was very confident saying, well, the DEA is not going to look into a small place like us. And I'm like, but what if they do? Like, could this happen? He wasn't concerned. I was freaking out about it. He was like, I was like, okay. And I remember the day, Target put out I think it lasted for 30 minutes. The DEA shut it down instantaneously. And this is when we were starting to sell it. I was teaching classes, but the corporate places that have bajillions of locations and they're selling it, it got shut down. I think after that bill, it still took a while to come into different stores, but I know some of the chain pharmacies now do carry full spectrum. I don't know if they carry full spectrum. I think they might carry broad spectrum, the chains, because they still look at it I think they could kind of crack down on it and say that it is, although it is, there's definitely a lot of gray area. There's gray area even with medicinal marijuana. I don't know what a lot of the state's laws are. In Pennsylvania, it's available as medicinal marijuana. Apparently, it's very easy to get your card. Basically, you need a letter from a doctor, or during COVID, it was a 5-minute Zoom call. You could just say, I have anxiety. And you could say, I went to a therapist, I tried a medication, and they're like, okay, here you go. So it was very, during COVID, I think it became very easy where you didn't even need to go through a doctor. But it's not a prescription. It's a letter of medical necessity. But I researched the heck out of it because I was like, well, what if you're driving with it? So whether you're an 80-year-old lady or you're a 20-year-old kid and you're driving with this in your car and you get pulled over for whatever, and this is on you, what protection do you have? And it was very gray. In the state of Pennsylvania, it was well, there was no protection. If they wanted to say, even if you have a letter from your doctor, you're not necessarily protected. So there's a lot of gray area. It's still very not, it's very, it's not black and white. It's not clear on, this would happen, but it looks like if they wanted to make a big deal out of something, maybe if they pulled somebody over that looked like they had something else going on and they saw it in their car, they could make a bigger deal out of it, even if it was a letter of medical necessity. But that letter doesn't necessarily protect you. So, it's still very much a gray area in Pennsylvania. Not sure, even recreational. I know on the West Coast, there's a lot. I think Washington isn't Colorado. I don't know about California, but I think a lot of those there. So I don't even know how that works recreationally. I don't know. Do you know anything about that at all?
I really don't. Although I can tell you, Washington was one of the first states, along with Colorado, to make it recreational. And I was in California over the weekend in Palm Springs, and I have never seen more recreational marijuana stores in my life. I mean, every block there was one. So it must be recreational legal there. I think one of the things is, Kourtney, as healthcare professionals, that we have licenses like pharmacists and and doctors, and we need DA licenses to, dispense or prescribe controlled substances. The federal government, specifically Congress and the DA, they need to make a statement about it. And actually, they need to take marijuana off the Class 1 controlled substance list to clear up the confusion, because, it really puts some fear into, medical professionals that, could we get in trouble for selling something with, 0.3% THC in it? Well, I mean, in theory, we could. It says it's a class 1 substance and it's illegal. So, I mean, I don't know of anybody that's been cracked down on that, but it definitely has to be addressed for it to become more mainstream. Because I believe that, there are, it's a great option for patients. And I think some patients are, the drug testing part of it too, that has to be addressed too.
Agreed.
Maybe they need to make a more specific urinalysis test where there's no cross reactivity. It tests specifically for THC, and it's more specific to THC. Maybe that's what they need to do at a certain concentration. So, because until then, there's a lot of people that are probably going without treatments that might help them a lot better than certain pharmaceuticals that are causing worse side effects.
Absolutely. But I find too that I have seen, broad spectrum, I don't see as good as results as the full spectrum. The full spectrum is really the way to go. That small amount of THC, it really does activate a lot of the other cannabinoids to do their thing. So there's like these newer products coming out that are like CBN, like I said, for sleep, and they cannot be isolated. So, and I'm sure they're working on so many studies now. Now, after they passed this farm bill also enabled both government studies as well as university studies where they can actually do clinical studies and clinical trials. That's what the Farm Bill also allowed. So now they're able to actually say, okay, we're going to do a sleep study. We're going to do a reproduction and endometriosis study. And there's companies that do work with the FDA and, and they are, allowing these studies to happen so that people can use CBD, medicinal marijuana, whatever it is. But you kind of hit it on the head, like exactly that. Like there needs to be some kind of differentiation, but even that small amount of THC is still helpful in that synergistic effect. So, it's like, it almost like you said, it needs to be removed from that Schedule 1. And I think it's coming. I think it is with the amount that you see things growing. But even like you said, when you were in California, like I drive past this one store on my way to work and it's lit up with all these cheesy, very, very classy signs that are like Delta 8, smoke shop, and I drive by and I'm like, okay. And I'm like, and then, so like, I researched Delta 8 because people are like, well, what's this Delta 8? It's like the legal high. And it's apparently it's legal to sell in Pennsylvania. I don't know how or why. A pharmacist friend in Florida owns a pharmacy and he was telling me about it. And I was like, okay, I have to try this. So I tried it. I would not recommend that to anybody. So, I mean, I couldn't imagine somebody taking that even at bedtime and then having to, like an elderly person getting up and falling. Like, I just don't, I can't, it's just too much. So like, I think what a lot of people don't realize is there's a time and a place for medicinal marijuana, and I'm all for it. But I think a lot of people, it's not necessary. What they need and can get from these over-the-counter products, they can get just as much relief as they can from medicinal marijuana. So, it's not, I think people, just because they can go get their card, they can, and they do it just because they can. But I think a lot of people, there's a lot of side effects that come with THC. There's a lot of cognitive things that can happen that if you don't want to just, go to sleep and take it, or if you want to function during the day, depending on what the concentration is when you go to a dispensary and get your blend made for you by the bud tender. But it depends on, what exactly, how much you're taking, but it can actually worsen, THC can actually worsen your anxiety and cause more of like paranoia and psychosis. So it's kind of like, depending on that level, like some people would be better off with the over-the-counter products. And a lot of people use the over-the-counter products to balance the side effects from the medicinal marijuana, which I almost look at as like counterproductive, because it's almost like, well, why don't you just use the over-the-counter products? Because you could get so much relief. And I mean, I could tell you testimonies all day. We could sit here and I could tell you, I mean, end of life care people. I had a gentleman come in and tell me about his wife at the end of life where he was giving her doses she didn't even know, just to keep her comfortable. And she wasn't even asking for her morphine in between. Like, it was keeping her that at bay. People that are stage 4 cancer patients going off of their opioids and using, just CBD. But I mean, the list goes on of things that I can just, like I said, stories I can tell you from people where, children on the spectrum, where I'm getting all these great testimonies of moms where kids are, frustrated and they have anxiety because of they can't communicate their words properly, and they're starting to use CBD. And I just got this amazing testimony the other day from a mom who's also a pharmacist, and her son is 6 years old, and he was having real defiant behavior. And she's like, I don't know what to do because he's not usually like this. And she started him on it. And in one dose, he was like, Mom, my brain doesn't seem fuzzy anymore. I can see clearly. Like a 6-year-old actually noticed the difference and told him how he felt. It was so like powerful when she sent me the test. I was like, oh my gosh. And then she took the dose up a little bit, thinking, oh, okay, maybe. And he said, Mom, he was 6 years old. Mom, I think you need to go back down to the lower dose. This one made me a little too hyper. Like, a 6-year-old told his mom to go back down to the lower dose. I was like, this is amazing. So
that sounds like a 6-year-old that has a pharmacist as a mom. Right?
So true.
Well, and I appreciate you talking about the medical marijuana thing versus CBD. And we talk about it often on our show, is that just because something is natural, i.e. marijuana or i.e. alcohol, does not mean that they're better than prescription medication. So, I got off my, my anti-anxiety medication and I just drank a couple glasses of wine a day. Well, that's not really, or I just smoke marijuana before I go to bed. And everybody needs to make their own decisions for their health. But I am of a big believer that, if you need anything like that to get through the day and it is causing cognitive impairment like alcohol and marijuana does, there's an issue. You should not have to do that long term. There's something else going on. So, I appreciate you diving into that. So, as we wind this up, I know you're an expert in this, Kourtney, and you've given some great information today. And we'll have to have you on again to talk about more specific things about THC and their treatments. As we wind this up, I'd like to talk about really kind of the reason that. Well, the main reason that you went on it to start with, and you got off Celexa, right?
Yes.
So Celexa is an SSRI commonly prescribed for depression. Also, some of them are Prozac, Zoloft. What are some other ones? Lexapro. Other one? Am I missing any? Kourtney?
Zoloft, Celexa, Lexapro, Prozac, Cymbalta. That one's a little bit different.
A little bit different, yeah.
Dexter, that works a little bit on different neurotransmitters,
right.
but we're all in the same, yeah.
Right. So I think we got them all. So if you are on one of those, CBD might be an option to get off. So tune in, everybody that is on an SSRI, because there are so many people on those SSRIs for either depression or for either anxiety. Lexapro is a very common one. I think they're all generic now. Pay attention because CBD might be an option. So, you want to talk a little bit about that and your experience with that in a quick minute?
Yes,
Kourtney.
Yes, absolutely. So, for me, when I was on the Celexa for I just had these random, like I said at the beginning, these random bursts. So for me to be able to go off of it that quickly, and again, you want to work with a healthcare professional too. So whether you go to your local, I would recommend a community, an independent pharmacy where the pharmacist is going to take the time to spend with you to talk to you with your options. But just in general, to be able to, you wouldn't want to just stop something cold turkey. It would be something that you would want to taper off of. I don't recommend somebody doing that themselves. I did it as a pharmacist. I knew what I was doing, tapering myself off. But it was a whole new world. I couldn't believe that it worked so quickly. And, like I said, it was to the point where it was kind of debilitating that it would happen so much. I would just be minding my business during the day and I would get these feelings and I just would, just breathe for a couple seconds. She'll be fine. So I think that anybody that's on these medications, I just stress to you, do it with a healthcare professional. Reach out to somebody who knows what they're doing. Don't go on to, Amazon and just order something. And because these products, there's a lot of unsafe products on the market. There's approximately 3,500 brands of CBD on the market, and 93% of them are adulterated, meaning that what's on the label is not what's in them. Yeah. So you really want to watch, especially if you're using it for something that you're not just, I'm trying it because it's a trend. Like somebody who has a specific condition, whether it be anxiety and depression, pain, migraines, seizures, the list goes on. If you want to actually use it for medicinal purposes and look at therapeutic value, you want to work with a healthcare professional. You can find me online. I can help you. Or if you want to go into your local pharmacy, I would say keep it to a community pharmacy. They're going to help you the most. And, with getting off of a medication and finding a good brand that's going to work with you and a specific type. Because like you said, Shawn, I recommend a tincture, an under the tongue tincture where you can really control your dose. Smoking, we don't know, vaping, all of these things with long-term side effects that we don't really know about. You're doing something counterintuitive to balance out your health if you're smoking something or vaping something. So using a tincture under the tongue, you can control your dose, whether it's, the idea with CBD is to start low and go slow. When you find where you're therapeutic, that's where you kind of stop. So we can talk about that at another time, but you want to always start low with CBD and go slow. And when you find your therapeutic, like they call it your sweet spot, when you find that, that's where you live. So you realize, okay, it lasts for 4 or 6 hours. Okay, that's when I'm going to take my next dose based on pain, anxiety, whatever it is. So
awesome.
That helps.
So tell us about, you have a website, correct?
I do.
What's your website?
It is wellnesssolutions.co.
Awesome. So that's the best way to get a hold of you?
Yes, absolutely. You can sign up for consultations there. I have a lot of information on CBD for both clients as well as practitioners. I'm starting a new program for practitioners to actually help them do what I do, because I think education is lacking in this department. It's lacking in practitioners. So if practitioners can't help clients, how do we get people rolling on more natural, supplements and treatments? So I'm rolling out a program next week, and it's going to be for clinicians to sign up to learn how to do what I do.
Awesome. Well, always a pleasure to have you on our show. You're a great wealth of knowledge, Kourtney. So looking forward to having you on again. Thank you so much, Shawn. I appreciate it. You're welcome. You're welcome. So tune in Monday, our podcast, 12:30 to 1:30 Pacific Standard Time. We will have Jason from CrossFit in Moses Lake, Washington. He's going to be talking about CrossFit and maybe the history of it, not maybe, but the history of it and what is CrossFit and how it can benefit you. Because, on our podcast, we're all about education about health and wellness. So exercise, diet, nutrition, hormones, and CBD and everything in between. So you don't want to miss out on that one. Another way to make your body healthy is exercise. So CrossFit, 12:30 to 1:30 Pacific Standard Time. Tune in. Kourtney, thank you for being on today. I really appreciate it. Listeners and viewers, thank you for tuning in to Health Solutions with Shawn and Janet Needham. Thank you.